Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks.
You're on air. Good afternoon. Warm welcome to everyone. Thank you for being here. We're reminded with mobile phones, if you have a mobile phone, if you could switch it off as it does interfere with our recording. We welcome those who are listening online, and that's it, I think, so please be seated. Thank you. I have one apology, that's Councillor Stojanchek as an apology. So, any declaration of interest? No? Confirmation of minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of September. Moved Deputy Mayor, seconded Councillor Dawkins. All those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. No deputations, no petitions, no community reports. Public questions on notice are there for those that have asked them and want to read the answers are there. Then we go to public question time without notice. Any questions from the public?
Good afternoon. Mayor and Councillors, good afternoon. I'd like to acknowledge the Council for the declaration of climate emergency a year ago and its Living Action Plan strategy and the Tomorrow Together initiative. They set an excellent example for other councils, and I'd like to ask a question that relates to that. Rather than address the physical engagement of the Council in relation to climate change, I'd like to ask for the Council to make provision to include a citizens' assembly as a natural extension to the consultative aspects of its Living Action Plan.
Thank you. That's the question?
Yes, it is.
Yep. Thank you very much for that question. And Council has been asked this question quite a number of times in the last 6 months or so, and our answer has consistently been at this stage we are not considering that, but I'm sure there's any councillor or any person that wants to, we will continue to review that and consider that, but at this stage it's not on our agenda.
Thank you, and I will submit a document for the perusal of the councillors later today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Any other questions from the public? No? So then, under the provisions of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act of 1993, Council acts as a planning authority in regard to items included under Addendum Item 9, Planning Authority. So we have 9.1. What about speakers? Do we have any speakers? Right. Found me a list. So no speakers for 9.1. Somebody happy to move a motion? Councillor Mackenzie, moved as is. Is there a seconder? Councillor Spencer, thank you. Councillor Mackenzie, you wish to speak to it?
Thanks, Mayor. Briefly, well, we visited the site this morning, and to me, just reading through the representations on this particular matter, most of the concerns were about the vegetation and or the roads and the amenity thereof of the road. I believe the conditions in relation to the subdivision protect the natural environment matters that were raised in those objections, and therefore that matter's been sorted. Well, this is an unusual occurrence to be speaking that way. And I guess that the issue with the road, and I take on board the comments made by infrastructure in relation to it being a 70-kilometre road and therefore the requirement for us to provide walking access and or even broader road width is not something that at this point in time is necessary. I also note that as part of the subdivision plan there has been land allocated for future widening of the road, so therefore that's been taken into consideration for future works. I guess that the thing that posed my mind, and as you can see when you go and visit the site, there is a subdivision that's currently on, being developed. This one's moving on from that, and it looks fairly obvious that in future there will be future subdivisions that will take place along that road, as they have on the other side of the road as well, which is going to provide more need for traffic. And I guess from the perspective of future planning, and this is more a question for infrastructure to think about, and that we should, I think, have a discussion as councillors at a future date, not on today's agenda, is really looking at contributions made by developers towards future widening of roads and so forth like that to improve amenity for something that the community is going to require, because we'll get to a stage, tipping point, where we're going to need to do that. And I appreciate that the road itself widening is quite appropriate. We've taken land for that, but I think it's something that we should have a future discussion to make sure that the impost is not being necessarily taken by the rate-paying public in general, rather than specifically those people who are benefiting from particular activities. But having said that, the subdivision meets the requirements of the zone, and I'm therefore very happy to support it.
Thank you. Question, Councillor Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. So obviously all of the representations received do mention the item of road traffic and the ability for the road to cater for the increased subdivision and expected increased volumes that will come from it. So more specifically, could our council, through the acting CEO, take that matter on board and facilitate an option for us to be able to begin that process so that we're ahead of the game with regard to being reactive down the track?
CEO, yes. There's a yes from that. Thank you. Councillor Spencer, wish to speak? No. Any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor McKenzie, wish to close? No. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. We go on to 9.2. We do have some speakers for 9.2. Samantha Clark.
My name is Samantha Clark and I live at 65A Burke Street, Launceston. I've owned the property since 2008 and I've lived there with my 3 children since 2014. We love where we live and we love our home, even though it's only 2 bedrooms, a toilet in the bathroom and 1 living space. So this development application will give us a second living room, a toilet separate from the bathroom and some outdoor living. This design, I've been advised, complies with the planning scheme. I understand there have been representations made on the grounds of heritage, privacy and overshadowing. With regard to heritage, the Tasmanian Heritage Council we have met with them and they have approved this application with some conditions, which I will obviously comply with. I've discussed with my neighbours at 65 Burke Street with regards to privacy, and we've agreed to continue this discussion moving forward as the development carries forward and we get into the nitty-gritty of designs. Regarding the overshadowing of 67 Burke Street, I've been advised that the proposed development complies with the inner residential zone and any relevant code provisions. The zone criteria specifically allow for some degree of impact on adjoining properties, and the comprehensive shadow diagrams provided will clearly demonstrate compliance with the 3-hour test, overshadowing adjoining dwelling windows as required. These representations have been considered by your town planners, who have nonetheless recommended approval. I'm very pleased to be here today, and I kindly ask that council do move to approve this application as recommended by your town planner. Thank you.
Thank you. Helen Tate. Just the
Mayor,
mic. Might have to
Deputy
lower
Mayor,
the microphone a bit.
all the councillors. I think, first of all, I'd just like to say I so much appreciate that most of you present have been to look at the site, and that the site really requires to be looked at in place. The development application has a pretty little house plan for it, but until you see the site and where that's going, it makes a very big difference. So I think I'm going to say, first of all, that I live at number 67, so I live adjacent to. I live within 2.2 metres of that wall. I need to say that in my cottage, in my house, it's more than a cottage, it's a 3 to 4 bedroom house, so it's a family house. 6 of those 7 rooms that I have there look directly onto parapet walls. There's one room in that place, when I bought that place, that had a small extension which gave me sunlight, and that's where this family congregated. It was the only place of sunlight in that house. It's where we found happiness and warmth and sunshine. And so what I've done is the best I can to use that corner, to improve that corner. So I now have a beautiful, sunny living room in the northwest corner of my house, and I love that. And I can understand why Sam loves living in this place, because it has the best sun and aspect in Launceston, I would say. So when we come to this DA, I was shocked in that I didn't expect any more extension could be done along a parapet wall. It is already beyond the maximum, and so I just expected this would never happen, and I'm concerned and I'm angered, and I need all those issues addressed. Is that my time?
That's your time for 2 minutes. Thank you.
I need to actually say then that there are massive issues about heritage. There are massive issues about the inaccuracies in the DA, and the third thing would be the actual use of that space for the person is not incompatible with the area.
Thank you. Your time's up. Now, are you speaking on behalf of the others?
Yes, it will be.
Phil Brumby, is that?
Yes, he should be coming, so I'll speak from him later.
Phil's here?
He's not here yet.
So he's not here yet?
No, but I can speak to his thing, but we shouldn't start with
I thought
him.
you were speaking for a few of the others.
I am.
Lucille Stubbs? Or?
Yes, I'd like to just read her
Yes.
comment. I just want to say Lucille Stubbs is a well-known curtain decorative person in town. I think probably all of you have possibly used her. She knows about light all over Launceston. She knows how it works. So she's just done some work for me. This has been 20 years for me to get carpet in and curtains in, and sadly, ironically, it's just happened this month. So Lucille and her husband say, my husband Mark and I own a professional window treatment retail store in Launceston. We cover the aesthetic component as well as the thermal and light control function of windows and doorways. I've been requested by Helen to give a statement on the effect of this development that it might have. A significant amount of time, effort and expense has been spent on enhancing the visual effects and the light control to this whole room. I believe this to be negatively impacted with what already has been installed and infringes on the effect my client worked hard and sought to create, which has enhanced not only the value of the room, but ultimately the value of the property. Will I just go through them, I think?
That's all.
No. Victoria Wilkinson?
Yes. Sorry for that one.
Yeah.
Victoria Wilkinson, yes.
Yeah, from knowing the owner of 67 Burke Street, I'm concerned that the DA that the amenity of sunlight and views and outlook that she so obviously intimately enjoys would be unreasonably impacted. And I need to say, Mr Mayor, that there's provision in the scheme about reasonable and unreasonable, and I think a lot of the issues relate to what is reasonable and what is unreasonable. She said she's disappointed to see that it's a setback of 1.1 metres from the side boundary for the deck, arguing that, and that's a concern. And she's talking about the actual, I'm going to say nonsense, in the solar diagrams, which argued about a chink of sunlight on the top of one window, which would add up for me, apparently, to have sufficient, such that the officer could say, this is fine. That's really incensed me, knowing also, and it's eventually exposed just last week, that the sun diagrams were 37.2 degrees off north. So anything you people have looked at will have been wrong information, massively wrong information, because some of the councils in this room... No, sorry, they know that north matters. Okay, so the envelope size, putting the wide veranda on this new proposition will not let more sun into this house. It will not improve this house. It just makes a very wide veranda, which you would put in the outback of Australia. And, of course, it's probably to be filled in later. My observation here is that the presentation of the DA for a small and restricted block seems to be pushing the planning criteria to their very limit, acquiring an overall approval at the expense of the amenity enjoyed by the occupants of 67.
Thank you.
Yep. Yes.
Ken Partridge.
Ken Partridge will speak on himself. Ken, are you ready? I'll give one more before Ken.
You've got one more? Yes.
I've got a couple more.
Who's that?
This is Maria Borsma of Gravelly Beach. So Maria, from time to time in her busy life, will call into my place and she will rest in my middle room. The one that is said is of no significance, is only a bedroom. Anyway, I won't go on, that's my stuff. She has said, because of the height of the wall to be constructed on the boundary, I believe it could significantly interfere with the residents' quality of life and well-being. For her to see the light on the spire and the weathercock of the Church of Apostles steeple nearby is inspirational compared with looking at a large blank wall, and I know what the deprivation can do. As well, this home is in West Launceston Heritage Precinct, and therefore the changed character will have a negative effect in that area. The development application would significantly reduce the value of this property. That's that one. I think we'll do Lionel Morell's one. Lionel has asked me to speak for him. You'll have that before you. It is quite a damning indictment of this whole process and of the neglect of the heritage qualities in this area, and also of the act with which you work under, which is actually to respect the heritage more than a simple tick from the Heritage Commission. And in the Heritage Commission's report you will see, please note at the end, this is insufficient detail, this is insufficient, you have that with you somewhere, and that it should not be relied on as the be-all and end-all of what the heritage character is here. So, Lionel's one, I would perhaps like to read it in its entirety.
You're using half the time already. You've only got 2 minutes.
So, goes 2 minutes is quick. We note the application incorrectly contends the section of the building will be not demolished is not heritage. It is heritage. All the proposed demolition construction wall will need to be by hand. The area does not have access. That's another story. The proponent has made no concession in reduction of residential amenity. There's nothing that would prevent the construction of bathroom, etc., on the ground floor. The superior aim of a qualified and experienced heritage practitioner is to consider what's prudent and feasible in alternatives which they've put forward. The massing of the building construction and absolute sunshine and daylight access to the resident is ably illustrated by the proponent in the photographs, which you should all have before you, and I'll present again if I need to, which actually show, from an artist's point of view, a photographer's point of view, that is where the view will be blocked. It's not about the shadowing, it's about, I now look several kilometres down the river, and with this DA I would look 2 metres. That would be the end of my outlook. It's a zone provision requires...
That's your time up for...
Yeah. In summary, our submission that the proposal would be refused and any further development, blah, 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 blah.
Thank you. Any others you got to read out?
Yes, I would like probably Ken to speak. Ken, are you ready? So haven't 2 minutes started yet?
Sorry?
Ken's coming. Perhaps there's one more I can do while he's coming.
Yeah, you can do that first if you like.
Yeah.
Have you got it ready there?
So planner's report that there are many incompliant and inaccurate and insensitive and unreasonable and so on here.
So who's that from, sorry?
That's part of my submission. That's from my planning
No,
advice.
you're not allowed to do yours. It's other people's.
Okay. That's planning advice.
You've had your 2 minutes.
I think that's nearly here.
Okay.
So Ken is about to speak, please. And this is to do with heritage.
Yep.
Situation.
So that's all from those. Thank you.
Helen, you dropped something. No, you dropped that.
Mr. Ken Partridge.
Mr. Mayor, councillors, good to see you all for the last time.
You've got 2 minutes.
Anyway, joking apart, I want to quote something with the author's permission. A local high-profile, most dedicated person to heritage. The reason why he lives here. His name is Eric Ratcliffe, Dr. Eric Ratcliffe. I'm going to quote a little piece that Eric approves from his magnum opus, 4 volumes of that, 2,700 odd pages. Either way, I won't take up more of your time. I've got to get my glasses up, if I can find the damn thing. Can you just separate the... separate the front, separate the front. Pull the sides. Shove it over the bridge of my nose. Here you go. Anyway, this is Eric's magnificent space. This paragraph I'm about to read is right at the end, a summary, if you like, of what Eric, who is a world-famous psychiatrist as well, maintains is important about heritage in particular. I quote. Forget about that. One eye's higher than the other. Anyway, I read. A hierarchy of listings is almost inevitable. Individual listings are unavoidable and necessary. But the emphasis on the quality or historical importance of individual items tends to leave other values, particularly contributions to local character, highly vulnerable. Local significance may be very important to a small town with little of individual value, but strong overall character. Failure to give more than parochial protection to a building may result in a loss of amenity affecting the local quality of life.
Yeah, thank you. Your time is up too.
The mysterious entity of morale and self-esteem within a community and contribute to the erosion of overall attractiveness of a place to its habitants and visitors alike. Yep. This is very important.
No, thank you, but your time is up. Thank you. Appreciate it.
And the final...
No, your time is up. Sorry. You've had 3 minutes and I should only give you 2.
3 minutes.
You've had well and truth. So are there any other speakers?
Thank you.
So are there any other speakers that are here? Is Phil Brumby here?
No.
No? Okay. Thank you. That's all the speakers that we have. We now have the item number 9.2. Is there a motion? Someone happy to move a motion? Or the motion or a motion? You can't ask it. No? No motion. Oh, Councillor Harris?
I'll move the discussion.
Move Councillor Harris. That means you're voting for it. That should do. Anyone seconding it?
I'll second it for the purpose of being able to ask a question.
You can ask a question then. We've now got a mover and seconder.
Mayor, on the bus trip this morning, there was a request for our officers to follow up the opportunity for an extension of time to provide the applicant and an immediate neighbour to discuss improvements between the two properties. I'm just wondering if there's a response to that.
Thank you. Who's answering that? Richard? No? Ian?
Thank you. Right. Oh, shit. Yeah, right. We did contact the applicant this morning, and they've indicated that they'd just require the application as it is to be assessed, and wouldn't necessarily agree to any further consideration.
No.
So, yeah.
The answer was no.
No. Thank you.
Thank you. To the motion?
I will, thank you. Inner city living has its advantages, it has its challenges. The advantage of living close to everything means that others want to join you, and that results in inevitable conflicts over space, light, views and amenities. I'm sure in the 1860s, when this house in Burke Street was built, there was probably just bush and gardens beyond up the hill, probably due to the steepness of the slope and everything else. However, today's DA in 2020 is one that's caused me, and I'm sure other councillors, great angst and deep thought. On one hand, we have a proponent at 65A Burke Street who wish to improve the livability of their heritage listed property. They wish to upgrade it to suit their 21st century lifestyle, which is usually a great way to preserve a heritage building for the future. And we've seen that around the city in many, many examples. On the other hand, we have her near neighbour who has enjoyed the views and amenity of the current situation for many years. And I must say that when visiting the property this week, her primary views were actually to the east, towards the hospital and the mountains beyond. There was a view to the north where you could see the church spire, but also Myers building and the Telstra building. I'm not sure that they'd actually come up as being great views, but nevertheless they were views. And the proposed changes to a neighbour's home will impact on her views to the north. The proponent will obviously gain an outdoor living area, but also an indoor living area, and improve the bathroom and laundry facilities in the property, and just make the usability and amenity of her home much better than it currently is. And ultimately, when we look at a planning scheme, it provides us with a legal framework on which we have to make a planning decision. One, to remove emotion and just rely on the relevant facts of the matter. The facts of the matter include you must have 3 hours of direct sunlight or direct light, which under the proposed building is achievable, and it is achievable on the 21st of June, the worst day of the year. And certainly when I was there earlier this week, the light was not impacted at all, even at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So clearly for at least half the year, there'll be no problem at all for direct light into those rooms on the northern side of number 67. So from that point of view, I felt that there was only one thing to do, and that was to support the DA in its current form. But I do encourage both neighbours to enter into some meaningful discussions to see what compromises could be made, particularly in regard to the floor height of the new deck, because I believe by lowering that by maybe half a metre would have a substantial impact on number 67's outlook. and perhaps have some ability for the two neighbours to get back on together. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mayor. I think it's always challenging where there are properties that are close together with proximity that have enjoyed a particular amenity for a long period of time to navigate the understanding and impacts of changes that come with development applications. The applicant has submitted a develop application that, as assessed, meets the requirements of our scheme and meets the measure of reasonableness on the three areas under most contention. I know that myself and other councillors, when discussing this and considering the application, have had strong regard for the impacts of the neighbour and have contemplated how best to address that. In coming up with some suggestions on site this morning about how we may be able to seek amendments to the process or to the application to meet the needs of the representor, it's my commitment to the process to support an application before us that meets the requirements of the scheme and trust in the mediation process that if to date the neighbours haven't been able to come together and seek a reasonable outcome, that before something goes to full appeal, there is the opportunity to mediate and seek a reasonable outcome. I believe an application, when submitted to us, that meets the requirements of the scheme is appropriate to be approved. And as the mover of the motion has said, I trust that there is an opportunity for the parties to find a way to come together to see if there is a reasonable solution to be met between both parties, if not now at a mediation, if the process goes to appeal. But when we're tabled with an application that meets the requirements of the scheme, I think it's a responsibility of us to support it.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor. And I hate it when I get conflicted on what I want to do and what I need to do. And as most people know, I try to be consistent with the way I approach things in relation to planning matters and try to make sure that I look at the planning matters and deal with them on the facts that are before us. I was walking my dogs 3 or 4 weeks ago and I walked past this house by accident and saw the notices that were posted on the neighbouring property and then had a look at it. And to be honest, as a number of people around, well, all the councillors know, but out in the public may not know, I'm the chair of the Heritage Advisory Committee here at the council. And I looked at it and I then looked at what the advice was, and I was quite surprised. I think I used the word curious in an email to find that halfway down the wall it ceased to become heritage, or we could do things that met within the heritage. And I've dealt with a lot of heritage matters over a number of years in this council where I found a lot easier to push a heritage matter than is today. To be quite frank, I think that the nature of the wall that is there at the moment is something that does have heritage stature. And I was quite surprised when I found that Tas Heritage had notified that it was okay to take some of the wall down, albeit rebuild it using similar bricks. But to me, the form of the wall itself is part of the actual heritage value of it, and the shaping and the scaling down of the wall, and the new wall that's being built is not going to look like that. So I was quite surprised, and then found that that's supported by a heritage advisor here. As a consequence of that, looking at it from a heritage grounds point of view, I'm struggling to find anyone who's going to support me in the places where I need them support in regards to the heritage matters. So looking through that process, whilst I'm concerned about it and I don't like it, I'm sort of forced into the situation where there are people with better qualifications than I have to make those judgments have made one. The second matter that I was concerned about was visual amenity. And I'm also well aware of the comments made by Councillor Harris in regards to the rules, which is the 3 hours of sunlight on the 21st of June being able to go into that property into habitable areas. And again, the shadow diagrams, Mark II, show even better results than Mark I, which were the incorrect ones, which would suggest there's appropriate level of sunlight. And I went to the trouble of actually even drafting an alternate motion. Somebody may deem to move it, but again, my concerns are that I look through this and I try to assess it in the terms of the Planning Act. And the Planning Act would suggest, as Councillor Finlay and Councillor Harris have said, that the terms that are met that meet the Planning Act are the ones that I'm concerned about, and they meet them. Like Councillor Finlay, I saw some opportunity, and in talking to the proponent the other day, I thought there was some ability for us to negotiate an outcome which may be more amenable to both parties, and I still hope that's the case even if this matter gets up today, on the basis that I'm sure whichever way it goes there's likely to be an appeal, and hopefully that something can be worked out between now and getting it to the Planning Tribunal. But my heart of heart says to me, I'm here as a planning commission today. The development application meets the planning scheme, and therefore I'll be voting in favour.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Soward.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor, and thanks to all those who took the time to make representations to us today. And as Councillor Mackenzie said, you know, there are parts of this that I feel somewhat conflicted with as well. And I just want to go through a couple of things. Councillor Mackenzie touched, like him, I was quite, and he's obviously got more experience in that heritage area than I have as in his role on that committee, but I was quite surprised as well, having had some experience here with heritage recommendations. I was quite surprised with the view that both organisations, both assessors I should say, took with this application. And like Councillor Mackenzie, I'm not a heritage expert, but I'm guided by those recommendations. As I often do, Mr Mayor, when I talk on development applications, I go to the issues that are raised and look at those and look at the responses to those. One thing that was mentioned in the reading out of the representations, as is often the case, was the mention of devaluing the property if this development application goes ahead. As I always say, it's really, really important that people understand that that isn't a part of what we do when we sit as a planning authority. It's not our position to consider that. It's not part of how that's assessed. And, you know, again, every time this comes up, it's something that is mentioned. So I just wanted to clear that up. The conundrum, I guess, I find myself in, notwithstanding the heritage query that I had in my mind, when we read through the application, Mr Mayor, as I'm sure, obviously I know we all have, but I'm sure those who've made representations have, one of the things that's really, really important is that the applicant has complied with what we need to consider. And I think, Mr Mayor, when we sit as a planning authority, it's really, really important that people understand that out there, when people make a planning application to the council in good faith, that it's up to them to comply. I mean, obviously that's what we do in this role. We make sure things are compliant. When you read through the application, Mr Mayor, it uses words like consistent, and it applies, and where it complies, I should say, and where it relies on performance criteria, when that comes into the scheme of things, again it complies. So on one hand, we've got an applicant who has, in good faith, submitted their application to the council, and they've complied with what they need to do. Obviously, they've gone through what they need to do. And on the other, we have a nearby neighbour who's going to feel the impact of this development, and obviously some others who've made similar representations. So I am hoping other councillors speak on this. I'm very interested to hear their thoughts. As I said at the start, I'm a little conflicted in that we've got something that complies, that meets the scheme, and obviously balanced by that an immediate neighbour, but others in the vicinity who also share some concerns about the impact this will have, obviously, on an area of Launceston that does have some historical significance. So I'll conclude by saying and adding my voice to those that have spoken already, and that I hope that there can be, after today, some ongoing negotiations that do try to deliver some satisfaction in alleviating the concerns that have been raised. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you to those who came today to speak for against this planning matter, and to other councillors for their considered words today. This is a very, very difficult decision for me to make, and I don't make it lightly. There were a lot of arguments today that were sort of philosophical in nature, and they were talking about how you live in a home and what it feels like to live in a home and what it feels like when that home is threatened. But unfortunately, the planning scheme doesn't allow for that. It allows for it in as much as the particular decisions around sunlight and noise and all the things that we discuss frequently, but it doesn't come down to that sense of emotion in living in a house, and that's where we really run into a lot of difficulties when we try to speak to someone's heart space from a logical space and a space of law. So I'm still undecided, and I hope others will make an argument that will change my mind here today. I have never been at this point in a debate and still undecided, and I was quite willing to build in an application to the tribunal to appeal this into my idea of how I was going to vote, which goes against everything that I've ever really considered in voting before. I want my vote today to count, and I want it to be the final word for me for this council, but I can't help but build in the idea of an appeal into this because that's what's been put before me. So we've discussed sunlight, we've discussed amenity, there is certainly accessibility issues which again won't be discussed as a part of the planning decision, but obviously it's going to be a really complicated build should it get up. The lack of, I suppose, that consultation between the two neighbours makes it very difficult to see how this is going to work for everybody in this small community. I'm going to sit down now. I'm going to listen to what else anybody has to say, but at this point I'm leaning toward voting against this motion and seeing how it plays out over the next few weeks. I hope there's an opportunity for mediation, that before it comes to tribunal, this matter can be negotiated in good faith between the two neighbours.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. It has been interesting listening to the views around the table, and I understand that, yes, we're not heritage experts, and yes, we do sit as a planning authority. I've looked at the amenity issues, and that would seem to be one of the main things that the objectors are bringing up. And I'd have to acknowledge that there has been some confusion, whether it's come from the objectors or from slight mistakes being made in the planning process, that have added another layer of doubt and confusion around this, when you hear one story saying it has this effect and another story saying it has that effect. I think I've got to the point where I accept that it is not an excessive amount of amenity that is being lost by the resident of 67 Burke Street. My thoughts go to the heritage aspect of this partial demolition and construction and alterations. And so I look at the local historic cultural heritage code, the purpose of it being to protect and enhance the historical cultural heritage significance of local heritage places and heritage precincts. And I do not understand how the demolition of a wall that's perhaps seen better days, but it's a wall that, you know, likely even unattended to would stand for another 100 years without too much trouble. I find it hard to reconcile that decision by our Heritage Council to allow that demolition to take place, how that protects and enhances the historic cultural heritage. I can't reconcile those two things. I can't understand how it encourages and facilitates the continued use of these places, how it encourages the maintenance and retention of buildings and places assessed historic cultural heritage, with historical cultural heritage significance. This building has been assessed with significant cultural heritage significance. Now, I'm no heritage expert. I too am on the Heritage Committee with Councillor Mackenzie, and so, you know, we get the opportunity to look at these things in that process. Unfortunately, this particular issue was not brought before the Heritage Committee, which includes members of the public as well as councillors and council officers. So that's another unfortunate aspect from my point of view. But my point is that this site is located on our local and on our state heritage list. The Heritage Code is there to protect and enhance this cultural, historic significance of these buildings, and yet somehow we're in a situation now where we're saying it's okay to knock that wall down, rebuild that wall, and that is somehow protecting that cultural heritage. I don't know where that dilemma has originated from, but I find it extremely troubling, not just for this particular development application, but for future development applications. I won't be able to support the approval of this DA today. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. I've got a few concerns. This outlook of this house is 150, 160 years old, where you've had the sun, the view and whatever. But to lose that, it's going to be life-changing. So I cannot support this. I possibly could support it if it was dropped down 500 mil, that's been suggested. But it's going to be life-changing, and to look out the view from that window, it's magnificent to see the church, and you're going to look into a screen. Everyone in this room would not like it happening next door to them, so I just cannot support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Cox.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. As I've lived over many, many years, and if it fits and ticks all the boxes, try that one, Mayor. If it ticks all the boxes, then we really are in a position where we can't refuse it. Previous speakers spoke about a heritage building. It's not about a heritage building, it's about part of a heritage fence or a wall. Heritage Tasmania have made a decision that it's not something that they're going to be concerned about. We can't challenge that or change it. I don't understand their reasoning or their logic for it, but they obviously have one. This ticks all the boxes. Unfortunately, with planning, there's not a page about emotion. There's nowhere that says emotion. There's nothing that says emotion plays a part of this. Maybe it should. Maybe it should be in there, but it's not. We are left in a position which most of us around this table, let's say all of us around this table, do not like being in. We're put in a position where if we abide by the rules that we're given, we upset other people. If we don't abide by the rules, we're then challenged, and this council is probably going to be taken to tribunal and we'll get a bill, possibly and probably. So it leaves us in a very difficult situation. We go by the rules that we're given, which is, did it tick all the boxes? Has it done everything that it was meant to do? If so, what right have you got to refuse it? Emotionally, you don't want to. It's not a right. So, with mixed views like others, I will probably support this.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Harris, do you wish to close?
I will, thank you, and I thank my fellow councillors for their thoughts, because like all of you, we all had differing thoughts at different times during that, ever since we've been looking at it, I'm sure. At times I've sat on one side and the other. But at the end of the day, as Councillor Cox has said, there's no page in the planning scheme on emotions, so we have to take that out. It does meet and comply with the current requirements of the planning scheme. And the Heritage Council has spoken out about the changes to the wall. And I guess as someone who's laid a few bricks in my time, I could see that rebuilding that wall with the old bricks would in fact improve the wall and potentially it would stay for another 100 years. I'm not sure that it would last another 100 years if nothing is done to it due to the large crack that goes right down through it. As others have said, property values aren't part of this decision, unfortunately. But having said that, I do believe that a well-built extension on number 65A would actually add value not only to 65A but to the other buildings around the area. It will show others that you can improve on a heritage property and still retain the heritage part of it. And when I stood on the deck of number 67 and looked back towards number 69 Burke Street, where 69 is shadowed somewhat by 67's deck, the trees that are there block that out and you don't notice it. And I'm sure if you were standing on 69's deck, you wouldn't be able to see the people on 67. So I do encourage the Sam at 65A to perhaps take advantage of that metre space inside the fence that she has to grow some trees up there to help soften what will be her deck area and also the screening, because trees certainly do that in a way that makes it unobtrusive and much more natural. And I guess to both Helen and Sam, one of you is going to be disappointed. This isn't a personal decision because we like one of you more than the other. It is one that's simply based on logic and whether we follow the planning scheme as we're required to as a planning authority. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? I thought that was going to happen. 5, 4 and 1 abstaining. Is that right? Correct? Deputy Mayor abstaining? I was. 4. You got them all? Yep. So that's lost. What's 5 out of 10? Lost. What's 5? 4. Yeah, it's 5. It's 5, 5. That's what I said. So, you need another motion? Councillor Mackenzie?
I've got the alternate motion for refusal, which the officers have got, so that's there.
So you move that? Is there a seconder? Councillor Finlay? What's the matter with it? I only need one. Councillor Mackenzie, wish to speak to it?
Look, I guess that I had that refusal motion in my back pocket because I guess my heart said I didn't love what I was seeing. And fundamentally, the motion is really to refuse the motion on the basis of the proposed extension will cause an unreasonable visual impact when viewed from adjoining lot, causing an unreasonable loss of amenity, and the proposed partial demolition of the heritage wall will unreasonably impact on the historical cultural heritage significance of the heritage place.
Thank you. Councillor Finlay?
Thanks, Mayor. I think when we consider matters like this, it's always tricky for the planning authority to find a position between an applicant that has submitted a development application which appears to reasonably meet the requirements of the scheme and a representor who, and we talk about emotion, but who on the physical construction of development feel impacted on the unreasonableness of an application before us. There's no doubt in my mind, having read the representations, visited the properties on site today and hearing councillors speak to this item, that the final development that may occur is not going to be exactly as was documented today. There was always going to have to be some sort of mediated outcome because of the strength of both positions. When you have a borderline position at the table from council, you know that the measure of reasonableness is close. Council are required to make a decision, a positive decision, where it is supported in the majority for it to go forward. That today will be a refusal motion, as has been echoed by everybody around the table. I encourage proactively and positively for the applicant and the primary representor to come together to find a solution to this. There will be a development on the property, there will be an impact on the neighbour. The role now is to come together to find the most reasonable outcome that could progress through an appeal or a mediation to bring out an appropriate development for the site.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor?
Thanks, Mayor. I'd like to follow the words that Councillor Finlay has used and say I think it's really important for the representor at 67 to understand that development on the site is a certainty. And if indeed this goes to appeal, which one would assume it will, there will perhaps be a better outcome achieved than what was recommended for approval in our papers today. But one thing is crystal clear: without the support of heritage, without it being on our list, and with that matter really of the unreasonableness at question, that development is certain. So I would encourage, as others have around the table, the proponent and neighbours to see if there is an opportunity to get together to address that issue of unreasonableness of amenity, particularly with regard to sunlight, and see if that can be achieved before that next process, should that be the train that the applicant chooses to follow.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'd certainly back up the comments of the mover and the second. The mover, the seconder, and the mover hasn't spoken. The mover has spoken, and Council and the Deputy Mayor. Thank you very much. When it comes to a solution, of course, the Council can't be in a position where we provide that solution. I think everyone can look at this and see possibilities potentially for retaining the existing heritage and incorporating that in the development, potentially for lowering the height of the proposed development. But this is not something that the Council can facilitate. So if that can be facilitated through mediation prior to any potential tribunal hearing, that would be a truly wonderful thing. I think, I did, harp on a little about the heritage aspect, but it does concern me that we're in a situation where people in Launceston trust that when a building is registered on a heritage listing, that it affords that building some protection that you can rely upon. I will be contacting the Heritage Council to understand more about their decision here. And I would love to see a positive outcome where the heritage, the existing heritage, what is still existing, can be protected, and where, the amenity for the neighbour is not unduly impacted. Let's not forget that the building development is on a block that does not have street access. So if and when a building development is approved, I imagine they will need access to virtually the only premise in that street which has a driveway, which happens to be the next door neighbour's building. So it would make sense all round if there can be a solution, a development application that addresses those issues and allows that process to come to some happy conclusion. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close?
Thanks, Mayor. And again, I get to vote for and against. So it's a quite interesting concept that I've created for myself. But the reality of it is I voted in relation to planning, and again, the vote was lost. And these are the only bases on which I believe we can appropriately refuse it. And whilst I think that they aren't strong on the basis of what I said earlier, I'm happy to do it. But note that this is a difficult property to actually do a development on. And as other speakers have said, a development will take place there of some description. It's now hopefully getting a meeting of minds where we can get something which is acceptable to all parties.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. The alternate motion, those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present around the table, so that is carried. Thank you. We now no longer sit as a planning authority. I'm going to suggest that we bring forward 19.4, as we have a couple of speakers for 19.4. Moved Councillor Soward, seconded Councillor Harris. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That is carried. So we go on to 19.4. Well, I hope they're in the room anyway. So, Jason, Sheriff. Oh, Ashley's there. I can see Ashley.
I'll go first.
Oh, Ashley's speaking. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Jason as well?
Yeah, Jason will speak second,
after
if
you.
that's all right.
All right, yeah no worries.
The subject right-of-way extends over recently constructed lots and the approved Raglan Street subdivision. It's associated with other land acquired by Council for road purposes extending from the Kings Meadows link. Discussions with Council officers prior to lodgement of the subdivision permit application identified that it was desirable to create a longer loop road to ensure a shortcut to Victoria Street and then Hobart Road to the south was not created. This meant that much of the land previously designated for road purposes was no longer required and created the opportunity for other uses on the land affected by the right-of-way. This included the area of public open space at the entrance to the subdivision, which arose from pre-lodgement discussions with council officers. The agenda item recommends that compensation is payable in relation to disposal of council's right-of-way interest, including that over the public open space, which ultimately will be transferred back to council, which the developer accepts. The right-of-way disposal is required by the permit for the subdivision, and it's a process which the developer got underway shortly after the approval of the subdivision in May 2019. The disposal is also required for titles in the current stage of the subdivision to be registered. Thank you.
Thank you. So is Jason Sheriff there?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to take this opportunity to bring to Council's attention this matter has been a 17-month process to get to this point, so it's been quite lengthy. One, we started the process, as soon as practically possible. So there are 29 lots in this development that are fully constructed, awaiting title, all of which are under contract, and the majority of homes designed and ready to submit for building approval. So we have concerns that should a decision on this matter be deferred, it would greatly impact on the scheduling of employment for in excess of 120 tradesmen, the uncertainty there. So not to mention the uncertainty for 29 families and the timing of their new homes completion. That's all. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. So we have 19.4 moved, Councillor Mackenzie, as is, seconded Deputy Mayor. Councillor Mackenzie, wish to speak to it?
I will, and I'd just like to commend our officers on the work that they've done to actually do this. It's not a small activity, albeit for maybe small reward at the end of the day, but I appreciate the comments made by the speakers in relation to the benefits to the subdivision. I guess my only comment that I would make, which is not specifically to this, is the amount of work that goes in by council to do these things. I think it's something that we need to review our processes, because I think it's something that there's certainly a significant benefit to the developer as a result of the work that we've done, and we should consider whether the way that we do these things is the way we should do it forward, and there should be a more commercial application towards it.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Just like to echo the words of Councillor Mackenzie. This has been going on for a number of months, and I think the thoroughness and the way that it has been presented to us in order that we understand all elements of what is a very complex matter has been brilliantly executed and undertaken.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. I do recall that when this development application came forward, if it was 18 months ago, I did vote against it. I felt as though as much as it's desirable to see development in Launceston, and I appreciate the comments from those representing that case, that there's also development will put undue pressure on the Kings Meadows rivulet and basin, and I don't think that we can continue to develop our town the way we have done in the past. I think we've seen the ramifications of that in other areas. We've seen the pressure that we have already put on that basin, for example, when it has flooded, where shops have been inundated and things like that. It's not the fault of the developer that this one last little development is going to contribute to that, but at the same time I do express ongoing concerns about that and for future developments in Launceston. When it comes to this particular disposal of interest in land, it makes eminent sense on many levels, and I understand that. I do query a couple of issues in regards to this disposal, though. One is that the intention here has been to avoid creating a shortcut from, let's say, the Kings Meadows interconnector and the back entrance to Youngtown by way of creating a loop road within the development. I do have concerns that regardless of that intention, that it still will be used as a shortcut. The intersection of Hobart Road and the Kings Meadows interconnector, as probably everyone here knows, can get rather busy. Hobart Road can get very congested. the idea that you could get across to Youngtown without having to go through that area makes me think that a short detour, I'm not to know exact meterage, but it would appear to be maybe 200 to 300 metres in length, may not be enough to deter those people from using that as a thoroughfare. And that is everyone who needs to use it, not just some people. It's human nature to find the shortest, in terms of time, way to travel. My second concern is that the strip of public land that will be, I suppose, designated highway in between, what would you say, in between the detour. I have raised this concern that continues as a highway, meaning that, yeah, it is perhaps possible that someone could drive across that and not be prosecuted because they're driving on a road, essentially. I find that problematic, and I unfortunately haven't had an answer to that concern. I might be wrong. I'm quite prepared to propose that as a question as to whether someone would be breaking the law if they drove along that particular strip of land, which will be, I presume, parkland, grassland, something like that. Might even have barriers to stop people driving on it, I don't know. But my point being that as a very, brief shortcut, it might become desirable for someone to drive across it. So I'm happy to propose that question, as I have previously. But other than that, it's eminently understandable why this solution has been sought, and I fully appreciate that. But my job is to prosecute any of these anomalies that I find. So if that question can be addressed as a public highway, thank you, sir. Thank you, Mayor, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. So now we have the question answered. Thank you.
Members of the public have a right to pass and repass across a highway that's been properly established, which is through dedication and acceptance. The way the highway has been accepted would establish the manner in which the members of the public can move over it. So the question of whether a person could drive over that area, it hasn't been driven over to my knowledge. That's not the level of acceptance that has occurred. So I don't believe that a member of the public could drive over that area of land with lawful authority. The reality is that this process will close off that issue. At the moment, there's some uncertainty in the area, and the decision will, once the plan is sealed, it will settle the rights in the area.
Thank you. A question, Deputy Mayor?
A process question, not specific to this, but still relevant nonetheless. Ahead of the first presentation of fees and charges in the coming year, could we please consider what Councillor Mackenzie has suggested with regard to how this could be incorporated into our fees and charges?
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close?
Thank you, and thank you for the comments made by all others. I appreciate that you voted against it, Councillor Walker, but the reality is we did vote in favour of it. So the subdivision is happening, and this is a necessary matter that needs to be resolved to enable it to be concluded appropriately.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all councillors present. That is carried. Thank you. So just on a couple of things on the Mayor's announcements. Had a pleasure on Tuesday 22nd to go to the Science and Engineering Challenge Days, and Councillor Harris was there. Absolutely fantastic to see our high school students, to see them from different schools across northern Tasmania. And Tasmania was the only state that held it this year because of what's happening in other states as well. So did a fantastic job, and the two top scores of all the schools in the state were from Launceston. Launceston Christian School 1 and the Riverside School 2nd, both from the other side. So fantastic. They did a great job, but it's really great to see the young students and how they work together, how their mind thinks, and how they, in the end, build a bridge to try and get the old Buster, big heavy weight, to go over that bridge. And only one school managed to do that this year, and that was from Smithton, I think it was, the Smithton High School, so they did well. But overall, the Launceston schools did very well, and it was great. And so Rotary do a great job in organising that, so we thank the Rotarians as well that were there as volunteers, and the UTAS put a lot of time and effort into that as well, which is great. It's also great to be part of, or go to a function for Remade, 10th anniversary, and a deputy was there, and Councillor Mackenzie was there, and it was fantastic. The colour in the room, the creativity in the room was absolutely amazing, and did a great job. They came dressed up as they would for Remade, so it's all fantastic, and they got a show at the end of October, so anyone that wants to enter into that is more than welcome to be part of that. And then also last night was good to host the function for the Just Cats Veterinary Clinic. Finally officially opened. It's been open for a little while, but finally officially opening their doors, and they've been absolutely fantastic for us as a council, the changes we've made at the tip face with the RSPCA out there. So they've worked well with our staff speak highly of them, they speak highly of our staff, so please pass on to all our staff. The work they've done has been fantastic and well accepted, and it was really a good event, and great to see the passion that they have very much in the room yesterday afternoon as well, and Deputy Mayor was there as well yesterday, so thank you. That's it from me, so move on to councillor reports. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. I've got 3 items that I'd like to share with the council today. The first is continuing on your topic of Remade. As you intimated, it was just incredible to welcome, in what I think was almost one of our first civic receptions, such colour, vitality, movement and music into the Town Hall, as we recognise Interweave and the work that they've done over the last 10 years to put together their sustainable art show, sustainable art and fashion show. Having them on the precinct at the QV Mag at Inveresk is incredible and shows a great level of support that this council has for young people with disabilities. But moreover, the Remade celebration, 10 years, shows the way that people with disabilities, people without, people who are practising artists, people who are emerging, and people who have a passion for fashion design can come together. So, like you, looking forward to the 31st of October, when the biggest Remade yet, Remade at the Albert Hall, takes place, supported by one of our community support packages in the form of events. Mr Mayor, speaking with regard to the Northern Youth Coordinating Committee and our support for young people within our municipality, it was incredible on Tuesday night of this week to recognise Neve MacDonald, who was part of the ABC's lockdown series. Neve is an emerging filmmaker who is studying in Hobart, attended school here in the north before she moved to Hobart to start her degree, and she was one of just a handful of emerging filmmakers who were selected by the ABC to document their journey as part of the COVID lockdown, and to have her work featured in a documentary that will continue forever to record what it was for her as a young person living through the pandemic. And tonight, Mr Mayor, we recognise lots of young people from hopefully the north with the Tasmanian Young Achiever Awards, initially to be held during Youth Week, this time for the first time ever to be held online. So we wish all of those young people who are flying the flag for the North well in tonight's awards. And Mr Mayor, finally, something that is outside my perhaps normal operating habitat, and that is my attendance at the Kings Meadows Bowls Club inaugural day on Sunday, where they initiated their season. It was a pleasure to be there, and a pleasure, I guess, when former Alderman Rosemary Armitage, MLC, was unable to bowl the first bowl, I think they are the words. She delegated that task to myself, something I wasn't prepared for, but still gave it as much gusto and effort and energy as I possibly could, and it wasn't a terrible failure. It went in the right direction. It didn't hit the, I think you call it the jack, kitty, good. But the most important thing was that the members of that club are so supportive of the level of support that this council has provided and continues to provide. The project that is to occur in the near future is the ramp, which we have been contributed some financial support to enable people who have access issues to be able to participate in that game at that facility. But I thank the members of the Kings Meadows Bowls Club for all they do in our community, and I know from your comments and reports, Mayor, there have been lots of starts for lots of bowls clubs, but it was great to be there for that one on Sunday.
Thank you. Councillor Soward.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I just wanted to take a minute to add a little bit of additional information to your very detailed report on the Science and Engineering Day. And a detailed conversation I had over the last little while just reinforced the opportunity that is there in the science and engineering area at the moment. There's obviously at federal government level some work around manufacturing in that sector and strengthening that. But I wanted to just add to your detail on the challenge and just reinforce the opportunity for Tasmanian students to embark in that engineering field, and particularly if you speak to anyone in the engineering area, they talk about the opportunity for female engineering students and wannabe engineers. So it's pretty exciting, Mr Mayor, to hear your detailed report on some great young people coming through, but I just wanted to highlight the opportunity that is there in that area, because at the moment we live in a COVID-disrupted year. It's a year of confusion, it's a year of uncertainty, but it's great that that opportunity is there, and one that I hope our people engage on, and we as a council can strongly advocate for, in terms of people saying where is there opportunity, where are there opportunities. This is certainly one. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Thank you. And yes, I also attended the Rotary Science and Engineering Challenge as a Rotarian, not as a councillor, and it was ably facilitated by the University of Newcastle, who come down to do that, and it was the only one that was able to be held in Australia, so the kids can claim that they're rightly the Australian champions. Normally in a non-COVID year, they do in fact go to state and national finals to participate, and Tasmania has done very well over the years in that. The other thing I just want to mention is at Franklin House, which I'm on the committee for, their opening has now been set for the 16th of October. They had a couple of week delay on opening because of some problems with the toilets, but that's now been overcome. So from Friday the 16th of October, they'll be open each Friday, Saturday, Sunday and Monday, so that's 4 days a week, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. So I do encourage anyone listening to go out there and enjoy one of our National Trust treasures. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor. And just on the back of our presentation from Theatre North last week, it was pleasing to see a theatre that's been dark for 7 months actually was alive again last week. There were two activities that took place at the theatre. One was on Friday night called Meat Lovers. Thursday night I think it was, Meat Lovers, which was a play read up in the upstairs where we could only fit about 30 people, but a young director who'd just come back from NIDA put on a play reading which was really entertaining, and I think that'll take off as something into the future with limited audience capacity. But the big one was the Coming Home concert that took place on Saturday the 26th of September, where we could allow 200 people into the theatre, which probably wouldn't normally meet the requirements of making a profit for anybody, but given that everything was donated and the performers performed for nothing on the stage, it enabled Theatre North, I think, to raise something like $10,000 as a result of that. And that's really on the back of support from the local theatre companies, and in particular Belinda King, who from Encore set out to try and put together a group of people to come and play. And play they did, all sorts of instruments. We went from comedy to bagpipes with John Ralph, to some wonderful singing voices and dancing from the Kim Rowe dancing group. So there was a very strong plethora of artistic talent on stage, and I think you could just see the excitement of those people that were on stage being able to get out and do what they haven't been able to do for quite some time. And I should acknowledge the Deputy Mayor, who stage managed the whole process in the normal, brilliant way that he does, and also Stuart Loon, the Theatre North Associate Program Manager. So it was a really great collaborative effort. Again, it's very challenging with the size of the audiences that we're allowed to have, and hopefully we'll get some better news from the government more shortly. I know there's quite a bit of lobbying going on to try and expand the audience numbers. I mean, a 50% capacity gives us a chance. And as we spoke the other day, we really do need to get the stage up and alive. But it was fantastic to see that, and congratulations to all of those people that took part in it, in the organisation and in the performing of it, because it was fantastic. Oh, and just wanted to quickly make the comment on Remade, which I attended. It's really amazing how far and wide they reach. I noticed that Mona was in there, as was Junction Art Festival, so they actually link in so well with so many of the other organisations around the country.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. I attended as a councillor today's climate emergency acknowledgement by Extinction Rebellion on the Town Hall steps. And I do congratulate Extinction Rebellion for continuing to raise this issue. I know that as a council, we have unanimously recognised that there is a climate emergency, and that is something that we can be very proud of, but it's something that we have to work on further. The change that we have to make is not going to be easy. It's not always going to be comfortable. None of us are perfect. We all have a carbon footprint. I've yet to meet someone who lives their life in a carbon neutral way, and I think that the people of Extinction Rebellion understand that as well as anybody. But it is necessary that we find ways to change. I know the council has done work in assessing our own carbon footprint of the council's activities. We need to find ways to encourage other people to do that, whether it's business or other government or non-profit organisations and individuals in Launceston. And then we need to look further into the areas that we operate, which is to do with planning in Launceston and how we can have a positive impact on the carbon footprint impact of those activities. As I say, that change is not easy, but I do congratulate members of Extinction Rebellion for reminding and continuing to remind the community that this effort is necessary. It's easy to maintain the status quo, it's hard to change. We're all busy with our lives. We can't always give the time to promote these causes, but I appreciate the work that's being done, and I thank them for their invitation today.
Thank you. Any other councillors with a report? Questions on notice, which are there from the previous, before, and the answers are there. Questions without notice, Deputy Mayor?
Thanks, Mayor. I've got 3 questions today. The first one, we have seen some media and online articles concerning the management of Carvilla graves. Could councillors please be provided with an update concerning vases, vase types and any other changes that may have occurred with regard to the management of the Carvilla facility?
Yes. Deputy Mayor. General Manager, Hurst.
Thanks, Mayor. Thank you, Deputy Mayor, for the question. We're aware that some recent media reporting has caused confusion and upset to people with family members interred at Carvilla Memorial Park. We understand that many Northern Tasmanian families have close personal connections to Carvilla, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to clarify a few details. As councillors will be aware, Carvilla Memorial Park is separated into different zones, including a lawn cemetery, ash placement gardens, a monument cemetery and memorial walls. Different areas of Carvilla have different interment options with different standards. These are discussed in detail with families when they are deciding on a place of interment for a departed loved one. Families often choose areas of Carvilla to inter loved ones specifically because these standards are in place, and that is why we issue reminders from time to time so that everyone's needs are respected. In areas like the ash placement gardens, for example, we provide free multiple-use plastic vases because breakable items like glass jars, bottles and porcelain vases can hinder maintenance works like mowing and brush cutting, and if broken, this can present a safety hazard for both our people and members of the community. Our suppliers advise that the plastic vases are made from recyclable materials. Given it's now spring, vegetation is growing and we expect visitation to increase over the warmer months. We recently posted a reminder notice in the Claygrove, Kooyong and Rose Garden ash placement areas. This was a reminder that breakable items like jars, bottles and ornaments can pose a hazard to visitors and staff, and it applies to those specific ash placement gardens, not graves in other parts of the park. Along with mitigating safety hazards, we also want to ensure that we meet the expectations of visitors that the gardens are uncluttered and well maintained. We find we have excellent compliance with it when these notices are posted and really have to approach families to discuss specific issues. The team we have at Carvilla are very conscious of the importance of this public space to families and the community, and will always seek to deal with these kinds of issues in an open, sensitive and respectful manner. And we are very sorry that the temporary signage installed has inadvertently resulted in the intent being misunderstood, leading to distress for some in our community. I would encourage too, if families have particular concerns, then to approach the staff at Carvilla and ask questions for clarification.
Thank you. Deputy, any other questions? You did. I thought there was a few.
Thank you. Thanks for that response. A number of months ago, councillors sought to have a far better understanding of the inordinate amount of money being spent on consultancies across our organisation. Where is this work at, please, and when should we expect to see the details?
Acting CEO.
Thank you for your question, Deputy Mayor. The work's well in progress. We have finalised the work up to date for previous financial years, just wrapping up the work for the 19-20 financial year. We should be in a position to share that with councillors in coming weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, a number of months ago, councillors were briefed on the progress being made by a group formed regarding the ever-prevalent issue of homelessness within our community. We asked and we were told that we would be informed of meeting outcomes and strategies. I'm just wondering what is happening in this space from a council perspective currently.
Thank you. Acting CEO. General Manager Hurst.
I'm sorry, I'll have to take that one on notice, Mayor and Deputy Mayor. I don't have a current update on that one.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. Just a couple of questions. How much of the Patterson Street Central Car Park is Launceston City Council buying for the sum of $6 million? This was reported in the Examiner in June. It's 2,853 square metres. I'm just wondering what the councils will own after the purchase.
That's been explained to us quite clearly, to us councillors, what's happening there with the bus terminal, and we're actually purchasing that ground use for the bus terminal.
Well, how many square metres will we own?
I don't know, I haven't got that, but we'll take it on notice.
I'd have to take that on notice, Councillor
Thank you. Second question, who in council is now dealing with in buying the property, and is that purchase agreement ready for councillors to review?
Take it on notice.
Are you talking about the purchase of the car park property?
Yes, that's correct.
The matter has been managed by the CEO, and I'd have to take the rest of your question on notice, Councillor Spencer.
Thank you. And the third one, Denny already asked about the consulting. I've been on council 2 years. I've asked a question twice about how much we're spending on consulting, and I hope we get it soon. Thank you.
That's a statement, not a question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Soward.
Thanks, Mayor. I've had a question come to me, and I think I know the answer, and it actually is associated with the Smart Cities program. Recently, around the city, green posts with solar panel type looking arrangements on them are springing up. And I know that a year or so ago a similar thing happened. Is that associated with the Smart Cities project?
I'll have to take that question on notice, Councillor Soward.
Thank you. It's just come through to me, so
yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? No, we'll move on. Pedestrian and Bike Committee of the 10th of September. Someone happy to move that? Councillor Harris, and seconded Councillor Mackenzie. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Harris?
No, thank you. I think it says it all, really.
Councillor Mackenzie?
I don't think it does quite. No, I just think, just for clarification, the first dot point is that there are no Tasmania-specific standards for bicycle infrastructure. And what that means is effectively when we go riding, we're not quite sure whether we're going to have sealed paths or quite what sort of story. And I think that in Victoria there's actually a grading system, I think class 1 through class 4. And one of our committee, I think, undertook to go off and research what that looked like with a view to actually bringing that back to council to consider as a grading of our cycling ways, so that when somebody goes riding they can say a class 1 means this, and that way we can grade them. So just for a bit further clarification.
Thank you. Councillor Harris, any other councillors wish to speak? Councillor Harris wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Tender Review Committee. Moved Councillor Cox, seconded Councillor Spencer. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Cox?
Straightforward, Mayor, just 2 bridges.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer.
Yes, it's straightforward, that one. I think they're fairly good bridge designers, these guys, and do a good job, so happy they got it. Thank you.
Good to hear. Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Cox, close. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 14.1 is the council workshop report. Deputy Mayor moved, seconded. Councillor Dawkins. Do you wish to comment on it, Deputy Mayor? Councillor Dawkins? Any other councillor wish to speak to it? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 15.1, notice the motion from Councillor McKenzie. Moved Councillor McKenzie, seconded Deputy Mayor. So Councillor McKenzie, wish to speak?
Be delighted to, Mayor. I guess this is a motion by 2, actually, because I think I actually moved a motion similar to this about 4 years ago. And then speaking to Richie at that point in time, he said, I've still got work to do. Can you leave it till I've done something? So I think that clearly what he did 2 or 3 weeks ago is that he well and truly did something. And I think if you look at my explanations underneath, he's certainly done something prior to that anyway. I think the activities that he'd taken on before his recent Tour de France activities, I think certainly would have entitled him to good recognition within the town. But certainly his view was that he still had plenty to do, and I guess I've watched him ride up and down those hills of France and Spain over many numbers of years, and always been saddened by a puncture at the wrong time, a bike fall, or just something that's gone wrong. And considering the amount of work that he did for a number of previous Tour winners, not the least of being Chris Froome, in past iterations of his riding as a super domestique, which after this year's Tour he's actually going back to. I just think that it is now an opportune time for us as a city to recognise his performances in the Tour de France and his other activities, noting that his career is not yet over, and we hope to see some further accolades into the future. But I think the timing of actually recognising it is now appropriate, and I think it needs to be substantial. And I know there are other opportunities that are being explored from the state government, Cycling Tas and others. So the importance is that we work together with those organisations so that we make sure that it's a coordinated effort, and that Richie gets the full appreciation of what his state thinks of him, as well as our city. And clearly the other item in my agenda item is really just to consider whether he's appropriately rewarded with the keys to the city, which I think, looking at the criteria, he should be eligible for that, but I think that's appropriate that the officers take that on board to go away and have a look at.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
I thank Councillor McKenzie for bringing this important matter before us, and I think it is a fitting way to recognise a former Hagley Farm Primary School student's ability to reach the world stage. Mr Mayor, I hope that you will see to it that your friend, former Councillor Frank Knott, Richie's Grade 5 teacher, is invited to any civic reception, because I know he, like many others in our community, who have been involved in the journey and watched a young person from our state go on to this level, is indeed very proud. The opportunity to celebrate that sense of pride that he obviously has for his sport, for his family, but also for his state, I think is something that we should really look at with regard to these items, and I look forward to receiving the officer's report with regard to Key to the City when it comes back before us.
Thank you, Deputy. Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. I don't know if many people know how hard Richie worked when he was a 16, 17-year-old kid. I remember following him up Palatine Hill, going fishing, and Richie was riding his bike. I spoke to his father a couple of days later, and he said Richie does it every day. So, great effort, proud of him.
Thank you. Councillor Soward.
Yeah, just briefly, I can't top that one. I tried driving the boat up the hill. Look, I just thank previous speakers and Councillor McKenzie for bringing this forward. I think the really key thing for me in terms of this achievement is the scope of what Richie's actually achieved. You know, there's obviously people who are in different sports around the world who obviously, you know, have a view of where that sport sits, but this achievement in terms of its worldwide reach and the sport and the actual toughness of the event, I think, as I said to someone earlier, riding to Hobart every day for 20 odd days, but not on flat surfaces and backing it up is just a wonderful achievement and a very fitting one. And in fitting with his humbleness, if that's a word, humility probably is a better word, the fact that he said 4 years ago this work wasn't done. So very happy to support it.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just join in by saying that, you know, I used to watch Tour de France just for the scenery, really, more than anything else. I'm not a cyclist, as some of these people around the table might be, but at the same time, my, son, who's now 17, joined me in that exercise, but became obsessed with the cycling and obsessed with Richie Port's exploits. And I think that goes for a lot of people in Tasmania, really, that we identify, with one of our own out there doing great things, and I do have a photo of home of my son with Richie from the Launceston, the Stand and Shaker Classic from a few years ago that's sort of proudly displayed there. So a lot of us have some small connection like that with him, and I'm sure we all can't wait until the opportunity comes that we can recognise his work and share that with the people of Launceston.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Thank you. Yes, I also want to congratulate Councillor Mackenzie for bringing this motion forward. Everyone has a Richie story. I've got a couple as well. When he was leading the Duro, the very proud principal of Hagley Farm School, on his third day in the lead position, mentioned to the school assembly, "Who's Richie Port?" At which point one little kid stood up and said, "I know." And he was expecting the answer. "He's leading the Duro." "No, that's my next door neighbour. He's a real nice bloke. But I don't know where he is." So I guess we'd better make sure we invite Councillor, Councillor would be Peter Carney along, who was the principal out there at the time, to any civic function. I first met Richie when he was involved with the Meter Matters campaign that was started, and in fact I have the original sheet that he signed laminated, so I have his signature and all the other Australian cyclists at the time. And of course we now see the Meter Matters is something that has become law here in Tasmania. So he not only supports that and cycling in general, but I always remember I was taking his picture with Andrew Niklich at the time, and then Andrew went off to have some other photos, and Richie came over and introduced himself to me as, "Hi, my name's Richie Port," as if I didn't already know who he was. But certainly a more humble and nice bloke you couldn't meet. So I'll look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillors? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close?
Thanks, Mayor. And I guess, look, the stories can go on with Richie. He's such a great guy. Again, I guess he's being talked about as being Tasmania's greatest cyclist, and somebody said, they had this conversation recently about it, and I said, you've got to be very careful. We have great cyclists here in Tasmania, and I'd rather he be talked about as one of the great cyclists, because we've had Danny Clark, we've had Graham Gilmore, look, I won't even start. I'll forget somebody. So I won't do that. But having said that, none of them came third in the Tour de France. But the reality of it is, each of them have achieved magnificent results over many years and made this city proud, made this state proud of what they've achieved, and put Tasmania on the map. And if anybody did follow the Tour de France this year, he was always announced as Richie Port from Launceston in Tasmania. Every time the commentators mentioned his name throughout the whole 3 weeks of the race. And it's interesting how that race evolved. He sort of started and got one of his bad luck stories early in the race and lost a minute or two early, which he spent the whole week, every day he would sort of get up another place, up another place, up another place. And the beauty about they didn't talk about him the whole week, and all of a sudden he popped up and absolutely smashed him in the time trial. I could talk about that for an hour or two, but I won't.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 18.1, street name. Proposed street name. Deputy Mayor. seconded Councillor Mackenzie. You wish to speak to it, Deputy?
All there, nice history lesson, thank you.
Councillor Mackenzie?
Yeah, it is a nice history lesson, and I guess the only thing that sort of runs itself out when I read the history lesson is actually capturing that information somewhere, and I'm not sure. I was just thinking about whether somewhere where we actually have these streets start, if there is a history lesson associated with them, that we actually have something to explain who Mr. Doyne was, because I never knew anything about him until I read this today.
Any other speakers? Wish to close, Deputy?
Well, just to say that the answer to that question and all Launceston history questions is Ross Smith, because if anyone knows anything, it's our own council employee, Mr. Ross Smith at the QV Mag.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? That's all councillors present. That is carried. 18.2, Councillor Soward's up pretty quick, and Councillor Cox seconded. Councillor Soward, wish to speak to it?
Yeah, pretty self-explanatory, but just to follow on from the Deputy's wise words there, again, perhaps that's something. I know that our council is very busy, as we always are, and I know Ross would be, but to actually have some of that stuff collated and shared, I think would be really, really valuable, because I think learning about a city and its past and people and things they've done is a really, really important thing. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Cox?
I'm just pondering on the name of Fortune Garland and Henlow. I would forward the information.
Any other speakers? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all councillors present. That is carried. 18.3, another proposed street name. There's no rush for this one. Oh, Councillor Soward, thank you. Seconded Councillor Harris. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Soward?
Well, the explanation on page 96 says it all, Mr Mayor. I could not possibly add any more to that. Thank you.
Councillor Harris? Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all councillors. That is carried. Now we move on to 19.1, budget amendments. Moved Councillor Mackenzie, seconded Councillor Soward. So we got, trying to find my page a bit behind it. Councillor Mackenzie, you wish to
I just
speak?
love it when you have zero. It's just the outcome.
Yeah, I saw it.
I think it's just what they call shuffling the deck chairs and moving from one account within the same area to another. So the reality of it is it's just moving around to things that are more appropriate to meet the requirements of the Act.
Councillor Soward, wish to speak?
Couldn't add anything else to that. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 19.2, budget amendments. Councillor Mackenzie moved. Seconded Councillor Harris. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
We should be doing an Alderman McKendrick job lot.
Well, you're allowed to if you're early enough.
Well, we could combine that one with...
Anyway, that's been done now. Councillor Mackenzie. Is seconded. Councillor Harris wish to speak? Any other councillor wish to speak to it? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. So we've got 19.3. Councillor Mackenzie, seconded Councillor Soward. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie? Councillor Soward? Any other councillor wish to speak to it? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. We've done 19.4. So therefore we now have a motion to go into closed council. Moved Councillor Soward, seconded Councillor Cox. All those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present, so we're now going to closed council. Thank you.
Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of
We're back on air, so we're now back into open council, and that's the motion before us, that we resolve to report in open session that it has considered the following matters at closed session: the minutes of the meeting and the City Prom review. Somebody happy to move that? Councillor Soward, seconded. Councillor Dawkins. Well, anyone wish to speak to? All those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Thank you. We'll close the meeting.